Since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, the number of conversations and articles about the health of Russian President Vladimir Putin has increased. Various media outlets have repeatedly published such speculations, but none of them have been officially confirmed. There is a possibility that this is just wishful thinking, but given that the average life expectancy in Russia is about 72 years, and President Putin is already 71 years old, the possibility of his sudden death in the near future cannot be completely ruled out. At the same time, there are discussions about whether Putin's death could affect the end of the war in Ukraine and who will succeed the long-time Russian Tsar. In this video I plan to reflect on what possible scenarios await Ukraine and Russia after this highly anticipated event. An important feature and the main weakness of personalist dictatorships is the issue of change of power. The death of a leader can lead to uncontrollable consequences for the country, ranging from internal power struggles with mass repression to civil wars or revolutions. It's clear that the transit of power in Russia can be smoother if a compromise figure is found. During his 23-year rule, Putin has never dared to name his successor and prefers not to think about how the Russian regime will function after him. There were already attempts at power transitions in Russia in 2008, when Dmitry Medvedev became the formal president of the Russian Federation. At that time, Putin was the prime minister, but in 2012, everything went back to square one. Putin became president of Russia again and has held the position ever since. For some time, political analysts believe that the transfer of power in Russia could follow the Kazakh scenario, where an autocrat hands over power to his successor but keeps him under his watch. However, after the events of 22, when Nazarbayev's protege Tokayev effectively removed his patron, the Kremlin probably abandoned this idea, and the outbreak of the war in Ukraine even more so. Some dictatorships move to inheritance, as in Syria, Azerbaijan or North Korea. However, Putin keeps his personal life private and does not promote his children in politics, so this option is also ruled out. Officially, in the event of Putin's death, the prime minister is supposed to become acting president. Currently, it's Mikhail Mishustin. This is a scenario enshrined in the Russian constitution, and in terms of legitimacy, such a transfer of power must take place. However, there is high probability that the legal aspects may be ignored by Putin's entourage and a power struggle will begin. Potential candidates for the leadership of Russia include Mishustin, Vaino, Patrushev, Portnikov, Naryshkin, and other people closest to Putin who are currently on the Russian Security Council. I would not seriously consider Kadyrov as the head of Russia. The future course of the war will depend on which candidate comes to power. If a moderate technocrat like Mishustin comes to power, then theoretically we can count on the war ending, or at least the conflict being de-escalated. Mishustin is likely to want to restore economic relations with the West, and therefore will be willing to compromise. Again, this may not lead to an immediate end to the war, but it will likely lead to a thaw in relations with Western countries. There is also a possibility that a power bloc headed by, for example, Patrushev or another security official will come to power. In my opinion, this option is more likely, as I have little faith in democratic transfer of power in Russia. After the conditional Patrushev comes to power, the Kremlin's current course will probably continue. Of course, this may lead to change at the front, but it was the power bloc that was in solidarity with the war, and moreover, it was a power bloc that increased its influence on the Kremlin and weakened its competitors in the form of systemic liberals and technocrats. Thus, the war will continue and the Kremlin's course will not change significantly. The problem is, as mentioned above, that there are no effective mechanisms for transferring power, so the struggle for power is likely to begin within the Russian establishment. The struggle for power itself will create a period of instability in Russia which could improve Ukraine's situation on the front. The power struggle can start inside the Kremlin and spill over into the outside world. Often during transitional periods, different blocs can even use the army to strengthen their position. Russia itself faced this 30 years ago, when on Yeltsin's order, tanks were brought onto the streets of Moscow and opened fire on the current parliament, which essentially amounted to a coup d'etat. Today the processes may be more radical given the general level of violence in society and the use of the armed forces in a real war. Putin's death will definitely cause instability in the government, but it's impossible to predict how long it will last and what it will result in. We can only talk about two extreme options. The milder one is a quick finding of a compromise figure like Putin today or the creation of collegial governing body. And the most severe one is a bloody struggle for power with the use of the army and special services. Obviously, the state of affairs inside Russia will affect the war in Ukraine. The Russian army may lose all motivation, some units may lose control, or there could be massive problems with logistics or decision making, especially if the power struggle affects army. In general, the power struggle and period of instability within Russia could be a good chance for Ukraine itself to regain its territory and defeat a demotivated enemy. Society's reaction in this way can play a key role during splitting the elites. It's extremely important who people will massively support. For example, when the military coup in Portugal took place in 1974, people took to the streets in mass in support of the putschists. This played an important role in their victory. Or there is the opposite example, the attempted military coup in the USSR in 1991 when the State Committee on the State of Emergency tried to install its own government. But under public pressure they failed. So the street factor together with the split of the elites can lead to unexpected consequences, despite the fact that civil society in Russia has no influence on politics at the moment. During the transitional period, the public's reaction and support for one or another force may be decisive. Russian support for the war is quite high and reaches 80%, but this may change over time and specifically during the transitional period. It's worth noting that federal Russian media can play an important role in this process. Who will control them in the event of transit and what narratives they will present. Given their current influence, this may play a key role in shaping public opinion in Russia after Putin's death. Is democratization possible in Russia? Such a process is theoretically possible, but its probability is not very high, especially against the backdrop of the ongoing war. However, the already mentioned Portugal went through a similar process. After the military coup and the coronation revolution, the right-wing dictatorship in Portugal fell and the democratization of the government began. It was also periodically accompanied by various repressions and bans, but the transition led to the establishment of a liberal democracy in the country. In Spain, democratization took a different path, namely with the arrival of Prime Minister Adolfo Suarez. He initiated democratic reforms himself, and a few years after Franco's death, Spain transformed from an authoritarian regime into a liberal democracy. Suarez himself was a man from the Franco regime and held public office for many years. However, after Caudillo's death, he decided to reform the country. Similar scenarios can occur in Russia. If the government is democratized, then the war will end in one form or another. To summarize, Putin's death will lead to great uncertainty for the future of Russia and Ukraine. Questions remain as to who will come to power in Russia and how, whether the country will be led by hawks or peacemakers. Please share your opinion in the comments on what Ukraine and the world should expect from Putin's possible death. Will Russia become democratic or will the security forces come to power? I would like to hear your opinion. Thank you for watching. See you soon.